at the dawn of the civil rights movement, before the fire hoses and police dogs of Birmingham, before the beatings of St. Augustine and Bloody Sunday in Selma, one city rose above the rest.
Tampa had to get this right.
Tampa integrated with peace and showed the rest of the country how to do it.
So this is the perfect place, the perfect time.
It's a story of leaders who sacrificed their power to bring us together.
You know, that there's something bigger than yourself, and I'm going to pay a price for bringing this.
A story of how Tampa's roads and parks got their names.
Leroy Collins Boulevard and East Fowler Avenue.
We are at Julian B. Lane Waterfront Park.
And a story seldom told.
And I thought, I never knew any of this stuff, and I don't think anybody around me knows this.
Where are you in this picture?
That's me right there.
I'm Craig Patrick, and for the next half hour, we'll meet Tampa's civil rights pioneers, hear their stories firsthand, and then watch it come to life in a play called When the Righteous Triumph.
The lunch counter is full!
Theater's meant to bring two opposing folk together.
With lessons to help us avoid conflict today and find common ground.
We can do it without violence. We can do it together.
We'll start with old Channel 13 news films that haven't aired for decades, as the stage is set for Tampa's path to equality. In September of 1959, a 16-year-old girl meets the legends of soul at her father's cotton club.
You know, there he was performing.
When you see me in misery.
In live color, you said, oh my God, this is the real Ray Charles. It was just wonderful.
Meanwhile, a bookish Tampa minister who taught Dr. Martin Luther King studies the art of negotiation.
He was constantly learning, constantly reading.
And a dairy farmer from Seminole Heights runs a quirky dark horse race for mayor.
You know, the mayor's races at the time were really a sprint.
6 months later, their paths would cross at a downtown diner, take down segregation, and change the course of history.
Life is about relationships.
The story of Tampa's civil rights movement is quite different than the conflicts of Birmingham and Selma.
Were they hurling racial slurs, hurling rocks?
No, nobody threw any rocks.
It served as a guiding light for the rest of the nation.
There was no violence. There was leadership on both sides.
And the full story never got the national attention it deserved on purpose.
The press found out about this afterwards, and it went well.
We combed through boxes of records at USF and Tampa City archives and digitized our station's old news films to piece it all together. The city we know today looked much smaller in 1959 and had a different feel from the rest of the South.
Tampa was unique because Tampa had been the Ellis Island of so many foreigners that came here as Tampa was developing.
Of course, you had Spanish, you had Cubans, you had Italians, you had Greeks in Tarpon Springs.
But you also had a tangle of contradictions. A cigar industry in decline in a city on the move.
USF is created. That's a big deal. The suburbs are booming.
A city blended by race and divided by race.
Segregation was still very much a part of life in Tampa. Everything that we did was separate.
With the black community oppressed and thriving.
And oh my God, on the weekends, everybody dressed up and came to Central Avenue.
In its 1950s heyday, Central Avenue is the Harlem of the South.
You were immersed in a world of people who cared about you.
But also a world in which white supremacists lynch blacks, and the Ku Klux Klan rallies outside her home.
I remember so well telling my dad I was afraid when they marched, and we peeped out the window and saw him, and he said, "Don't worry, I'll protect you, but you know, everybody doesn't love you. We do, don't worry, I'll protect you."
This empowers students like Arthenia Joyner to challenge injustice at just the right moment. After Florida's Rosewood Massacre of 1923.
Essentially, the black community was wiped off the map.
After a Lake County sheriff and his posse terrorized 4 men and killed 2 in the Groveland injustice of 1949, and after Harry T. Moore leads the Florida NAACP, registers African Americans to vote, and a blast of dynamite kills Moore and his wife on Christmas 1951.
It's devastating. It's extremely painful. And their crime was that they were struggling for equal rights for black people in Florida.
These are the catalysts of Tampa's awakening because it motivates students like Arthenia.
We're not going to stop fighting. We're not going to step back and be trampled over.
And after the Moores murder in Brevard County, the leadership of the NAACP shifts to Tampa. Middleton High School grad and Army veteran Robert Saunders takes the reins as state field director, and as Dr. King forms the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in Atlanta, King's former professor at Morehouse College, Tampa Reverend A. Leon Lowry, becomes Florida's NAACP president.
He was a newly arrived African-American ministerial leader. He had not lived in Tampa. He was not a native of Tampa. So he came with fresh new ideas, with perhaps a fresh new approach.
And so does Tampa's new mayor, Julian Lane, the dairy farmer who comes out of nowhere in 1959 and beats a well-known incumbent.
It is one of the elections of the century.
Voters elect a mayor on his success as a farmer and his glory days at UF.
He's an all-American story. I mean, really. He goes to the University of Florida and captain of the football team. I mean, does it get any bigger than that in Florida for campaign credentials?
He also serves in World War II at Camp Livingston, which affects him and this story in a very big way. Julian Lane III is the mayor's grandson.
I ended up being a lieutenant colonel and was in charge of the African American units. He was sending soldiers that were committing their life to fight for the country and were dying on the battlefield, but would come home and still be segregated. And he was always believed in being fair and always believed in doing the right thing.
And so Tampa voters elect one of the first Southern mayors to support racial integration, though they don't yet know that.
He couldn't very well say when running for mayor that he wanted to end segregation and expect to get elected.
Not at all. Not at all.
He didn't mention it, and people didn't think to ask.
It was only about a 6-week election cycle.
As one of his first acts, Mayor Lane forms a biracial committee, and he picks Reverend Lowry and some of the city's most respected black and white community leaders to serve on it.
Lane had the insight that a committee of people from the black and white communities, if they could talk, if they could communicate, they could solve issues before they exploded.
Which brings us to the flashpoint, February of 1960. Black students in Greensboro, North Carolina peacefully sit at a segregated lunch counter. Sit-ins take off and spread south, and white supremacists lash out.
The almighty press let the world know what was going on, and people got energized and fired up and realized that we too are America.
But unlike the ugly scenes to our north, Tampa has a plan to protect the students and community leaders advising both sides.
They knew it was coming, and they were able to guide it into a disciplined, nonviolent movement.
Coming up, Tampa shows the nation how to peacefully integrate, and we have the inside story of the plan.
In 1955, Tampa's booming suburbs are restricted to whites. Black people live separate lives and are banned from eating out with white people.
For white Southerners, that was an intrusion. That was an invasion of social space that was forbidden.
But the power structure is starting to shift. Florida's new governor, Leroy Collins, who supported segregation on the campaign trail, is connecting with civil rights leaders.
Actually became involved with black leaders in Florida.
Cheryl Rodriguez's father, Francisco, is a Tampa lawyer who files a blitz of lawsuits against Jim Crow laws, and yet Collins still takes his calls.
His wife answers the telephone, and they ask to speak to the governor, and he comes to the phone.
And before the Christmas of '59, the leaders of Tampa are doing the same thing. Mayor Julian Lane appoints black and white community leaders to a new committee focused on bringing people together.
He created in '59 a biracial committee, even before there were any recent outbreaks here.
His picks include high-powered attorney Cody Fowler, you see on the right. He led the American Bar Association. And Tampa Reverend A. Leon Lowry, president of Florida's NAACP. Shirley Lowry is the Reverend's second wife.
It's about people getting together and being unified.
And Lowry has a right-hand man who leads the NAACP Youth Council, a young Tampa barber named Clarence Fort.
I don't think any of us really knew what we were getting into when we started that civil rights movement.
In February of 1960, Fort watches the sit-ins of North Carolina and starts planning similar protests in Tampa.
I don't know how I got that much nerve, but I just decided that if others could do it, we could do it too.
He recruits around 40 students at Tampa's two black high schools, Blake and Middleton.
I wasn't really one of the outgoing people.
Jim Hargret is an introvert and one of the first students picked.
I guess we weren't as fearful as we should have been. We were kind of just excited to do it.
Arthenia Joyner is a go-getter and the last student picked.
He said, I waited to select you last because you talk so much the whole world would have known it before we even got there, because I was known to be very loquacious.
Reverend Lowry and Francisca Rodriguez advise, train, and inspire the students.
Yes, they were wonderful. Reverend Lowry, strong, well-respected gentleman, and Francisco Rodriguez was this silver-tongued, brilliant lawyer that we knew that if it became necessary, he would get us out of all of it. Oh my God, he was just phenomenal as a lawyer.
On February 29th, they gather at historic St. Paul AME Church, walk into Woolworth's on Franklin Street, and sit at the lunch counter.
Where are you in this picture?
That's me right there. I always took the first seat every time we had the sit-ins.
We sat for a while, and then consequently later we left because nobody made any effort to serve us at all.
We just closed it down that day and then went home.
The press describes it as a faltering effort, but it's just the start.
I can remember them saying, "We won't go, we won't go."
They return through the first week of March, and Mayor Lane orders police to protect the students.
Some of them riding in police cars to the lunch counters.
Yeah, they actually stood behind us right here. That's them. That's why we were so successful in Tampa, because they stood behind us. The police officers make sure no one got to us.
This goes on for 4 days, setting up the next act.
When the biracial committee and the mayor agreed that if they could get the students to call off the demonstrations, then the biracial committee would negotiate with the merchants.
The students trust the mayor and the committee and stand down.
Now we're actually having a dialogue, and that's a major breakthrough in civil rights in a southern state and a southern city.
Governor Collins makes the next move in a statewide broadcast.
The Honorable Leroy Collins. Well, I want to talk to you about race relations.
He stuns the white supremacist who elected him by denouncing segregation.
It is unfair and morally wrong.
He calls it undemocratic, unrealistic, and unchristian.
Now, friends, that's not a Christian point of view. We can never stop Americans from struggling to be free.
And he announces a statewide biracial committee modeled after Tampa's. And he picks Tampa committee members Perry Harvey Sr. and Cody Fowler to serve on this one as well.
Mr. Cody Fowler of Tampa has agreed to serve as chairman of that new committee.
Former Congressman Jim Davis is Cody Fowler's grandson.
He never stopped working and trying to help our community grow. It's about sitting with people, digging deep, finding out what we have in common, looking beneath the surface.
In Tampa, the committee spends months convincing lunch counters to integrate.
The problem is, of course, these stores are not independently owned.
They're national chains, and none want any backlash.
The manager of Woolworths would say, well, if I integrate my lunch counter, I'm going to lose all these white customers. They're going to go to Crest.
So they negotiate with 18 different stores.
So if you could figure out a way in which all of them do it at the same time.
Their internal notes from August of 1960 reveal just how much they put into coordinating places and times.
They would go to the various lunch counters at the exact same time. And this was not going to be known exactly to the public at large.
They do it and then announce it later, too late for the mobs to attack.
But I think there's a bottom line here, and it's trust. Reverend Lowry and Mayor Julian Lane and my grandfather Cody Fowler trusted each other.
That's how change occurs, when people can talk and discover they have more in common than they realize.
And Mayor Lane keeps going.
They started doing the pools. We have a group of African Americans that want to come use the pool. He said, let them swim. It's their right. They can swim.
He helps integrate the fair by showing up on the day reserved for blacks. And so does Governor Collins.
We need more love and less hate.
Both put Florida on the path to equality, and both pay for it politically. Mayor Lane loses re-election.
This is about courage. Mayor Julian Lane lost his re-election without regret.
And Governor Collins gets trounced in his next campaign for Senate.
He was a man of real moral courage. It killed his political career, but when you stand up for what you believe in, regardless as to what eventually may happen to you, you know in your heart that you did the right thing, and he did.
A governor and mayor sacrificed their power for a new generation to rise up. Jim Hargret and Arthenia Joyner move on from the first sit-ins to the halls of power, each serving nearly 2 decades in the Florida House and Senate, while Tampa becomes a model for racial progress across the state, and Florida a model across the nation.
Once we can sit at the table and talk, we discover that we all want the same things out of life.
Coming up, Tampa's path to equality stalls. The city erupts. The lessons of 1960 once again help restore peace, and artists produce a play that reveals how we could use those same lessons here today. In 1960, the path to equality leads through Tampa, with the first Southern governor to denounce segregation, first mayor to help integrate lunch counters, and black and white community leaders who worked together to help keep the peace.
And Central Avenue was the mecca of black businesses.
One of the most successful hubs of black-owned businesses in neighborhoods south of Harlem.
I observed all the people in their finery. I mean, they dressed up.
Until the powers that be decide to build the interstate through it. Much of it gets condemned.
And it was all gone.
Stores and homes run down. Good-paying jobs are scarce. And black families cannot get loans from banks to shop for homes elsewhere.
Something called redlining. They've literally taken red and circled areas where blacks would not have access to.
Resentment simmers.
That the white man think he can rule us.
Until it explodes. Riots break out on June 11, 1967, after police shoot and kill a fleeing robbery suspect.
However, I feel that there are many, many underlying causes. This is just the straw that broke the camel's back.
Raging around Central Avenue, burning and looting much of what was left.
It hurt to your heart. You said, why? But people were angry.
Tampa forgot how it became the nation's bellwether for race relations just 7 years before. In these old Channel 13 news films, you can hear how people felt there was no dialogue.
They have had difficulties in getting these people together.
Why y'all want to talk to yourself, man? Don't let nobody else talk.
They lost sight of what the rest of the nation called the Tampa Technique.
The Tampa Technique was a product of people who cared and who believed in reason and believed in dialogue.
And Tampa recovers by bringing it back. Reverend A. Leon Lowry, who helped integrate the lunch counters in 1960, helps negotiate another period of progress and peace.
But we've got to get back to these underprivileged people and see them as children of God who need to be helped, who need to be led out of the darkness in which they live.
The city withdraws forces and trusts young men who live in the reeling community to help restore order.
These young people wore white hats.
The riots play out, police policies change, Tampa commits to increased job training and other investments, and relearns the values of dialogue, negotiation, and nonviolent resistance.
You've got to have people who are making themselves heard and present, and then you hope a kind of Tampa Technique will resolve these issues.
Coming up, watch the Tampa Technique play out on stage. Meet the writer and cast of a show called When the Righteous Triumph, and see how the lessons of Tampa's sit-ins can inspire more positive change. Andy Hughes is a guardian of history.
Yeah, this is all the Cody Fowler materials.
And these boxes of records, letters, and pictures at USF reveal a remarkable story. A tale of black and white leaders who joined forces to peacefully integrate Tampa's lunch counters. And these are handwritten notes and even sketches of how they pulled it off.
And this is basically the game plan for how to go about it.
And we're not the first ones to dig into these boxes. A few years ago, Andy met Mark Lieb.
And I thought, I never knew any of this stuff, and I don't think anybody around me knows this.
And Mark happens to be a playwright.
I thought, what a great subject for a play.
A few years and more than a few drafts later, his vision is playing out on stage. This is a rehearsal of his play, When the Righteous Triumph.
That Tampa Negroes can now dine at lunch counters like full human beings.
The 2-hour play takes us through Tampa's first wave of sit-ins in 1960.
We're going to start off at Liggett Rexall, and then we're going to go over to McCrory's and Miles Brothers.
When black students sat at a whites-only lunch counter in Woolworth.
All right, everybody out! The lunch counter is closed!
Mayor Julian Lane directed police to protect the students. And community leaders like Cody Fowler and Reverend A. Leon Lowry stepped in.
And his theory is we've got to love them. If we love these people, it will eventually change everything.
And they negotiated with 18 stores to integrate them all, with little fanfare and no violence along the way.
Seems to me that a lot of writing about Florida is madcap, zany, aren't we, bizarre. I wanted to show people that Florida has a certain gravitas as well, that we've been through some extremely important moments in history.
Stageworks commissioned the play and hosted it for a while.
The reaction from the community was astounding to me. It sold like crazy.
And then in 2025, Stageworks partnered with the Strass Center to bring it to a larger stage at the Jabe Theater.
I think it's going to illuminate a very important part of our time.
And the producers partnered with Tampa Bay area schools to offer matinees for student field trips.
Theater's meant to bring two opposing folk together.
They get an important lesson in civil rights and Florida history.
We'll be able to look at today's racial problems with a little bit more intelligence and wisdom.
And inspiration for challenging times.
We're a society now who tends to not want to even hear another perspective. It's not a permanent fixture. We can overcome it. We can solve these problems. We can do it without violence. We can do it together.
Check out Stageworks and the Strass Center for schedules and times. And check out Fox13News.com and the Fox Local app for our series of documentaries in the civil rights movement. We traveled throughout the South to meet the leaders of the freedom struggle, from the sit-ins of Greensboro to the Freedom Riders to the campaigns in Birmingham, St. Augustine, Selma, and Tampa's path to equality.